Thank you for joining me for this Lifeway study of the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 14 to 28. This is session 10, and the text is Matthew 22, verse 15 to 22, and verse 34 to 40. The title is Honor, and the lesson summary statement says, Believers' highest calling is to honor God in every aspect of their lives. I'm going to begin the class with a movie clip from the movie Amazing Grace. It's a number of years old now. If you haven't seen the movie, it is a movie I would recommend. It beautifully pictures the life of William Wilberforce. And so I'm going to give a clue, a taste of this man, Wilberforce, that's pictured in the movie. There's one clip that talks about his conversion. There's another clip where he's meeting John Newton, the author of Amazing Grace. They became good friends, and Newton is talking to him about the slave trade. And in this portion of the movie, Wilberforce has come to talk to him about possibly entering the ministry and leaving politics. And John Newton tells him, you need to stay in politics. That's where you can use these wonderful gifts that you've been given. And it's a very powerful presentation of taking on the issue of slavery. Anyway, I'm toying between those two ideas. You could look at that on YouTube, and if you wanted to use that as a way to get into the lesson, and then just share some additional information about Wilberforce. So I think it was 3 days before he died, they actually passed in Parliament the canceling of the slave trade in terms of Britain's involvement in it. But Wilberforce is a powerful example of someone who loved God, honored God, and found a way to put that into practice in the social realm as well. And that seems to be the two ties that are involved in this Sunday school lesson. Now, this is the last week of Jesus' life. It's called Passion Week. The word passion refers to his suffering. This happens on Tuesday. We saw last Sunday school lesson. It was an event that happened on Tuesday. By Friday of this week, Jesus will have died on the cross. And so it's very powerful what's taking place. The flow of the week goes like this. On Sunday, there was the triumphant entry, which we talked about. And on Monday, he comes back and he cleanses the temple. As he's traveling in, he sees the fig tree and he curses it. And as he leaves the day from Jerusalem, the disciples see the fig tree withered down to its roots. It happened in one single day. That all happened on Monday. And then Tuesday, we have a number of things taking place. It's called the Day of Controversy. Jesus' authority is being challenged all throughout this. And what takes place is he tells these parables. Parable of the two sons was our Sunday school lesson last week. And then that's followed by the parable of the wicked tenants. And that's followed by the parable of the marriage, of the wedding feast. And in those parables, what Jesus is doing is he's indicting the religious leaders because of the two sons. He says, you have rejected the Son of God. The tax collectors and prostitutes have received him. That's why they're getting into heaven and you aren't. And then the parable of the wicked tenants is a sentence of wickedness and unbelief that's passed upon the religious leaders. And then there's the marriage feast, that parable, and that's this execution of the sentence, and that is they are cast out. Now, after that, what happens is the religious leaders lay 4 traps for Jesus. And that's where our passage comes from. There is the paying of taxes. That's a part of our Sunday school lesson. That's followed by marriage and the afterlife. And it's really not a question about marriage. It's really a question they're getting at is the resurrection, because the people who are coming are Sadducees. They don't believe in the resurrection. So they spin this story, they think, to show the ridiculousness of the resurrection, and Jesus nails them, of course. And then there's the question by the lawyer, what's the greatest commandment? That's a part of our lesson, and that's followed up with the nature of the Messiah. There are these 4 challenges. That's kind of how the day, Tuesday, is going. So our first point is government authority. And I want to just read through the text with the class and bring some things out that I think are important and ask them some questions. And my questions are going to take them back to their personal study guide. Because again, I'm looking for ways to reinforce them studying their lesson before they come to class. As teachers, you know it makes an altogether different class experience when the students come, the class member come, prepared and have given thought and prayer about the lesson. So I just keep doing things I hope to encourage them. I need to pay attention to this personal study guide. Verse 15 says, "Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to trap him by what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians." And I want to ask the class, these are very strange partners, the Pharisees and the Herodians. And I want to ask them, what is it that the Pharisees believe about the government? How do they feel about what's going to take place about paying taxes? And how about the Herodians? What about them? Who are they? And your personal study guide will help them with that. You may want to do some digging into that, but I want to show that this makes strange partners in their opposition to Jesus. And this word trap him means they had studied, they had given thought to how they could trick Jesus into incriminating himself. It says teacher. Now the word teacher there is a word that is used by Matthew from people who are coming to Jesus and they don't believe in Jesus. It is respectful, and yet it is not coming with an openness to Jesus. And they use it several times. Teacher, they said, "We know that you're truthful and teach truthfully the way of God. You don't care what anyone thinks, nor do you show partiality." Now the word "know" there means that they understand Jesus never compromises his integrity for the sake of others. They know this. They know his lifestyle. They know his consistency. And they say that you are truthful and you teach truthfully the way of God. What they're getting at here is that Jesus is the embodiment of truth. If you want to know what holiness looks like, look at the life of Jesus. If you want to know what God's love looks like, then look at the life of Jesus. Jesus is the embodiment of the truth of God, but it's also revealed in the way in which he lives. He displays through his life the truth of God. That's what they're saying. Now, it's irony that's taking place here. They don't believe a word of this, but they're actually speaking the truth. And then verse 18 says, perceiving their malicious intent. And the quarterly will tell you that this is a sign of Jesus's awareness, his part of his deity, that he understood exactly what was going on. It's not just that discernment from human beings picking up various cues. They're very clever. He knows exactly what they're doing. Perceiving their malicious intent, Jesus said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites?" And we've talked about the word hypocrite before, and you may ask the class if they remember what we've described, that it comes from the theater, and it described the mask that the actor held before their face as they played the role of a man. In one scene, went off the stage, came back, played the role of a child, had a child's mask in front of him, went off the stage, came back and played the role of an animal or something of that nature. And so that mask was called a hypocrite. And that came to be applied in terms of the way people would relate with one another with these false motives. So why are you testing me, you hypocrites? He uses that 13 times in the book of Matthew. Verse 19, show me the coin used for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. Now your leader's guide gives you some explanation about a denarius, that it has the image of Caesar on it, and it has some wording on it that would be blasphemous to the people. It has this image of Caesar, and then it has these words, son of David and high priest, which represented the state. And so that's one of the reasons Christians were so opposed to burning incense to the Caesar. And Now, it is a denarius, and that's a 1 day's wage, and so it's just a very minimal amount. I read from the Tax Foundation that Americans spend the first 107 days paying all their taxes. We really, so far at this point in the year of 2026, we've not reached tax-free day yet. So when you think about the fact that it's a day's wage, it's a very minimal tax. But it was a tax that was paid not by Romans, but only by subjects of the empire who were under the control of the Romans. And the Jews were always reminded, you're subject to the Romans. Now, they had 3 taxes they paid, the Jews did. There was a temple tax, that's found in chapter 17, verse 24 to 27. There are indirect taxes like customs and sales tax, those kinds of things. And then they had this direct, or this direct poll or head tax that they had to pay to the Romans. So the irony is they're in the temple. So a question could have been asked, why do you have a coin with the image of the Caesar and the statement that he's the Son of God and the high priest? Why do you have that in the temple? But that's another matter. That's not the primary matter that Jesus wants to deal with. Verse 20, whose image and inscription is this? He asked them. Caesar's, they said to him. Then he said to them, give then to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. Now, what I want you to notice is, from the Jewish perspective, when they said to Jesus, they said the word pay. But when Jesus speaks to them, he uses the word give. Now, the point that you understand why he uses that word is he says, this is a coin that Caesar gave you to use in various responsibilities and events of life. Caesar gave this to you. When he asks you to give back to him what he gave to you, then do so. Which implies that God has given to you. And when God asks you to give back what he has given to you, then you should do so as well. But the point that he's making is give to God, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and give to God the things that are God. It says when they heard this, they were amazed. They were defeated. He was not arrested. He didn't incriminate himself. And you can go into the horns of the dilemma that Jesus would be on in terms of his answer to this question and how he just simply took himself off of that horn. And so dealing with the text, that's my point that I'm driving at here. And I'm sure there's much more detail that you can give as well. This phrase in verse 18, malicious intent, the commentators say that this is a word used of the leaders and in the Old Testament. And it links these men, these leaders, with the rebellious leaders in the wilderness generation. And in a sense saying they exhibit the same rebellion and the same apostasy as those leaders. So how are we going to apply this? Well, you remember back to COVID that John MacArthur made the decision that he was not going to close and cancel in-house worship services at Grace Community Church. He made the decision to continue holding indoor worship services, even when the state government and the local government restricted these large gatherings. So I'm wanting to ask the class, what would be the reason for this act of civil disobedience by John MacArthur? What are the reasons that he would have given for that? And we'll have some discussion. And then here are the 4 reasons I found that John MacArthur gave to the local government, the state government, even the federal government, why he didn't feel it was right to stop having indoor worship services. Number 1, Christ is head of the church, and the government does not have authority to prohibit worship. That's his first one. Number two, another reason that he gave. Gathering together is a biblical command. It's not something that's optional or, quote, non-essential. Remember, that was one of the reasons they used to close businesses. Number three, the restrictions seemed inconsistent, since some secular activities were allowed while churches were limited. And the fourth reason that I found, there was concern about government overreach into religious life. So here are the reasons that he gave, and of course he would have based those things on his biblical understanding of Scripture. Now, on the other hand, the government leaders argued that he should close indoor worship services, and they also, in their talks, gave 4 reasons for this. Number one, restrictions were necessary to slow the spread of COVID-19. That was their understanding at that time. Number two, large indoor gatherings like worship services posed a high risk, especially for older adults. Number three, the measures were temporary and applied broadly, not just to churches. And number four, churches still had alternatives like online and outdoor services. Now, your church may have had some kind of a combination of that. And so my question I'm asking is you see this is one of those situations in which you're kind of on the horns of a dilemma. Do you obey what you understand to be the importance of teaching of Scripture, or do you see that importance in terms of their social testimony and the importance of being a contributor in society? So I'm just wanting the class to discuss those things. I don't want the class to fight about those things. I just want them to see this is the kind of complexity that they were throwing at Jesus, and Jesus' answer was brilliant. Now, we probably still have those kinds of things today, and I would just simply ask my class, which arguments did you find the most compelling? And so, government authority. It's not always so clearly understood or defined. There's a picture that we have in our day. I'm going to draw this on the board. I'm going to draw a circle and I'm put in it the word secular, and I'm draw the word spiritual, and draws another circle and the word spiritual. And today it seems as though these are the two circles in the way we view life. There's the secular life, there's the spiritual life. Well, the ancient people saw things differently. If you were to draw a circle and then put the word secular in it, and then draw a circle on the outside of it and write the word spiritual or sovereign, that's how the ancients saw the world. They recognized that over all authority was the authority of God, and that it had an impact on every aspect of our life, the spiritual life, of course, and that it also had authority over the secular life. And that seems to be the debate today in some circles in our churches, and how to live this out. So if your class is still agreeable and happy with one another, you can move on to the second point, and that is God's authority. Again, I want to just walk through the text and give some fuller explanation for it. The text can be divided into 2 parts. There are the questions of the Pharisees, verse 34 to 36, and then there's Jesus's twofold answer in verse 37 to 40. So questions and answer. That'd be an easy way to divide the text. Verse 34, when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they came together. Now, a number of commentaries take you to Psalm chapter 2, verse 2, where the opponents of God gather to plot against the Lord. And so they see this being a fulfillment of Psalm 2, verse 2. And one of them, an expert in the law, asked a question to test him. Now, he's not really wanting a real, true answer, and this was a controversial topic in that day. And again, see, he uses the word teacher. It's somewhat respectful, but it doesn't have any of the authority and respect behind it that really is intended. Teacher, which command in the law is the greatest? He said to him, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important commandment. Now you'll notice that the word greatest is the word that hinges on either side. And so what we're talking about here is he's not asking which law do we need to obey and the others we can ignore. He's asking which command is the fundamental command that all the other commands depend on. It gets to the very heart of all the commands that are found in the Old Testament. And Jesus picks this passage out of Deuteronomy. Now, this passage, this is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5 that he's quoting, but what precedes that in verse 4 is what's called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. And then it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, the idea is the fundamental theology for Jewish people is monotheism. There is only one God. There are not two gods. There are not many gods. There is just one God. Baal is not your God. Allah is not your God. Yahweh, that's the word he uses. Yahweh is your God. He's the God who made the covenant with you. He's the God who promised to be faithful to you. So when you understand there's just this one God, and it's this God who's entered into covenant with you. He's a God of love and faithfulness, mercy and grace. The obvious expression of your relationship with this God is to love God. And you are to love God wholeheartedly with your mind and your strength and your will and your emotions. Every part of a human being is to be given over to the love of God. And he says this is the most important commandment. It's first in priority. And all ethical commandments spring out of this supreme command to love God with everything you've got. And then you'll see why Jesus does something. They don't ask for it. And the fact that they don't ask for it, but Jesus gives it to them, tells you how very important the second commandment is, to love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says all the prophets and all the law and prophets depend on these two commands. So you see the flow? There's just one God. And what is our first responsibility to this God? This God of covenant love, this God of faithfulness and mercy. It is to love him with everything you've got. And then Jesus, that applies to the first of the 10 commandments, the first 4 commandments. And then Jesus adds in that second part of the 10 commandments. If you love God, you're going to love his highest creation, and that would be people. And then he gives the way in which we are to engage as yourself. Now, he's not taking self-denial or other-centeredness. He's just simply saying that the focus of every human being is themselves. When they wake up in the morning, they're thinking about their day, what they need to be doing. They don't wake up thinking about others. Occasionally, obviously, you do. But the focus of a human being is nearly always taking in things that affect him. And Jesus is saying that when you have this kind of love for God, it spills over in this love for people. And the way that you're supposed to love them is the same kind of focus you give to yourself, the same kind of concerns, consideration that you have for yourself. You're to have that same kind of focus for those people. Now, that would revolutionize our churches. Listen, if Christian people loved God with their whole heart, and as a result of that, they loved people as they loved themselves, they had a focus upon other people like they have a focus upon themselves, you wouldn't have a shortage of workers in church. I mean, think about it. There would be people my age who would be thinking about young couples who need to be in Bible study and need to be at peace that their children are being taught and cared for. And people my age wouldn't be saying, well, we did it our time, now it's time for them to do it their time. No. I'm concerned about them. I want them to have Bible study. So I'm going to go work in the children's department. I'm going to be a part of the rotation of caring for kids or whatever the responsibility is in the church. Think about sponsors for youth. Think about people stepping forward in their class saying to the teacher, I want to help you with this class to minister to it. We have Sunday school teachers who have asked their classes, would you help me make phone calls on a regular basis to members in our class? And they can get nobody to do that. That's a failure of love for people. Now notice this last statement that he says here. All the law and prophets depend on these two commands. All the law and prophets depend on these two commands. Let that sink in. So all of our Bible is about loving God and loving people. All of our Bible is about that. All of our Bible studies ultimately come out with this conclusion: to help us love God or to help us love people. It doesn't matter where you start in the Bible. It doesn't matter the topic you deal with it in the Bible. You can go back to the Christian and his responsibility to the government. And Jesus is saying that where that's going to lead you is it's going to be an examination. Do you love God with everything you've got when it comes to your government? Do you love the citizens with everything you've got as you love yourself? I mean, every Bible study leads to one of these two things. Wonderful, wonderful passage. So, how are we going to apply this? Well, let's just start here with our church. Now, I've probably given away some of the information that I wanted to probe the class for, but I have a question for the class. How could you give attention to God at church? I mean, we could talk about family, we could talk about our workplace, we could talk about our hobbies and all the different areas of life. Well, let's just bring it back to the mission field of the church. When you show up at church, how is it that you could give your attention to God at church? That may sound like a simple question, but if you've been a Christian any length of time, you know sometimes you can go through a whole Sunday and you haven't given a whole lot of thought to God. Isn't that amazing? So how do we give our attention to God? And I want to get some answers from them. And I may need to prime the pump by giving them some ideas. For example, how about just praying when you get to church, God, this morning is yours. I'm going to discipline my thoughts that what I hear and what I see is somehow, and what I experience is somehow your love. And I want to experience more of your love. I want to love you. So pray, God, this morning is yours. How about on a negative connotation, being aware of worry that distracts me from concentrating and thinking about God this morning. Being aware of irritation or frustration with someone at church or at home or wherever that is continually trying to pull my mind away from concentrating and being aware of the love of God, giving attention to God. That's what I'm trying to get the class to do. I'm wanting it to be helpful to them when they come to church so that it is deeply a spiritual experience with God. Now, the second question I have for them is, how could you act loving at church? If God wants us to focus on other people like we focus on ourselves, what needs to take place in our relationships with our fellow church members? But how about this? Just listening to the person that you tend to avoid because they just go on and on and on. And I mean, it's a stream of consciousness and they just wear you out. Maybe there's a level where you're allowing it to go beyond what's healthy, but how about just intentionally engaging that person and listening to them, giving them a moment of your attention? Or how about this one? Meet a tangible need of a guest. When people show up at your church, they don't know where the children's classrooms are. They don't know where the nursery is. They don't know where the bathrooms are. They don't know if you provide a bulletin or where they could be seated. And how about just this morning, when I see someone new, I'm going to introduce myself. And if I discover they're a guest at our church, I'm going to engage them in that. If this is their first time, ask them if I can. I'm just going to be a servant of this person. That's what I'm talking about. How could you act loving at church? I'm sure there are many things that could come to mind from your class. I'm going to give them a postcard. And on one side of the postcard, it says, "This week I will honor God by ... And so I'm wanting them to think, what is something I could do this week? Maybe the first thought I'm going to have when I get out of bed in the morning is, God, help me honor you and love you today. Instead of, oh me, it's another day. On the back side, I have this statement. This week I will intentionally love, and there's a blank space, by, and then just some act. This week I'm going to intentionally love my grandchild by taking them to lunch during school, so, something of that nature. But what I'm wanting to do with that is I'm wanting to drive home this idea that here's the clearest expression of Christianity. I live in a way to honor God because I love God. And so I need to think about that every day. If this is the most important commandment, I need to think about that every day. Secondly, I need to find a way in which to focus on someone else. This is God's will for me. Now, the way I'm going to close it is I have a coin here. It's a figurative coin given to me by a Christian political leader in our state, and so it has an image on one side, it has statements on the other side. But I'm going to ask the class, using this coin, how would you illustrate this lesson? And so they're amazingly wonderful, creative people. But here are just some things that, just a couple of ideas. The coin has two sides. It's one coin, but it has two sides, and you can't separate them. The idea being, loving God will naturally lead to loving others. Here's another thought. This week, my top priority is to honor God and intentionally love others. Here's another thought we can take from the lesson. In my, quote, real world, I am to live to honor God and love the person in front of me. I'm trying to get into the life of the class those two concepts: loving God, showing Him honor, and intentionally loving others. Listen, think about that. If you could help your class just adopt that as the way they're going to approach every day, what amazing life change it would create. What a wonderful opportunity and gift God has given us to teach His Word. God bless you for doing so.